They say that behind the gilded walls of the Imperial Palace lies a story as unsettling as it is mysterious, one involving Caligula, the emperor Rome could never forget, a tale buried in damaged scrolls, whispered by desert merchants, and hinted at in the reports of shaken soldiers. According to these fragments, a small group of Egyptian priestesses, captured during a controversial expedition along the Nile, was brought to Rome under circumstances no one has ever fully explained. Why would Caligula, with the entire power of the empire in his hands, show such interest in women devoted to the ancient rites of Isis? What did he believe he had found in them? What's even more disturbing is that the surviving accounts describe behavior so strange, so erratic, that even his closest allies were left in disbelief. Actions driven by superstition, fear, obsession, and a desperate search for meaning. And this is where the line between myth and reality begins to blur. Because whatever happened in those underground chambers didn't just change the fate of those priestesses, it sent shockwaves through the ancient world. Get ready to uncover one of the darkest, strangest, and most controversial chapters ever associated with the reign of one of Rome's most unpredictable rulers.
During the early months of Caligula's rule, Rome believed it was witnessing the rise of a bold and charismatic leader. But behind the grand ceremonies and public displays of confidence, subtle changes were already taking shape inside the imperial palace. These were shifts that most Romans could not see, changes that would soon reshape the very core of imperial authority. Among the first signs was Caligula's growing fascination with foreign cults, especially those connected to Egypt. Reports from Alexandria, normally treated as routine administrative documents, began to receive unusual attention from the emperor. He questioned small details that previously held no political significance, as though he were searching for something personal within those accounts. The arrival of a small group of Egyptian priestesses in Rome was initially seen as a ceremonial exchange. They were women of high standing in their homeland, custodians of rituals and traditions rooted in centuries of spiritual authority. But once inside the palace, their treatment diverged sharply from diplomatic protocol. Instead of being honored as representatives of a respected culture, they were quietly escorted to a restricted wing, away from the eyes of the public, and even from most members of the court. Over time, rumors began circulating among palace staff. Servants mentioned seeing Caligula walking alone toward the eastern corridors at hours when the palace was normally silent. Guards reported that the emperor dismissed anyone who questioned his presence in that wing, and no official explanation was ever given for the confinement of the priestesses. While the Senate remained unaware of the specifics, senators sensed that something was shifting beneath the surface. Caligula's demeanor during official audiences had become increasingly unpredictable. At times, he appeared intensely focused. At other moments, completely disconnected from political discussions. Some interpreted this as exhaustion, while others suspected he was preoccupied with matters he refused to share publicly. At that moment, few could have predicted what was truly unfolding inside the Eastern Wing. But it was there that the distance between the emperor and the traditional structure of Rome began to widen, an early separation that would eventually become an unbridgeable divide.
As weeks passed, discussions inside the palace revealed an increasingly unusual pattern. Caligula began restricting access to certain areas, issuing orders that contradicted long-standing administrative norms. The Eastern Wing, where the Egyptian priestesses were held, became the most heavily modified and most tightly controlled sector of the entire complex. Servants tasked with carrying supplies to that area described a strange atmosphere. The windows were covered, the lighting was dim, and the guards acted with a level of vigilance rarely seen in internal palace duties. Some whispered that the emperor spent long stretches in that wing, often emerging with an expression impossible to interpret. The priestesses, once respected keepers of ancient knowledge, had been stripped of their ceremonial roles and left in a state of complete isolation. Their adaptation to captivity was slow and painful. Accustomed to open-air rituals, sacred texts, and the presence of community, they now faced days of silence broken only by the echo of footsteps from guards patrolling the corridor. Outside the wing, the rest of the palace experienced a growing sensation of tension. Meetings that once flowed smoothly became rigid and fragmented. Officials who attempted to raise concerns about the emperor's absences were dismissed or redirected by senior advisors trying to maintain stability. Caligula's closest administrators noticed his obsession deepening. Their reports mention moments in which the emperor referenced omens, symbols, and dreams tied to Egyptian deities, elements that had no place in Roman governance. Those attempts to understand the nature of his fixation were quietly suppressed, as no one wanted to risk provoking the emperor's sudden bursts of anger. In the broader political arena, Rome still presented a facade of order, but behind the marble walls of the palace, the seeds of instability were rapidly taking root. Each day that passed with the eastern wing under heavy guard was another day in which the emperor drifted further from the responsibilities and expectations placed upon him by the empire.
While the public remained unaware of what was happening inside the palace, the tension among high-ranking officials intensified. The guards assigned to the eastern wing ceased interacting with other units, as if they had been instructed to isolate themselves from the rest of the palace. Their silence only fueled further speculation. Some of the staff noticed subtle changes in the demeanor of the priestesses. Though no one was allowed direct contact, reports circulated that they were attempting to maintain fragments of their traditions within the confines of captivity. These attempts were quiet, almost imperceptible, but they revealed their determination to hold on to their identity in a place designed to strip it away. Meanwhile, Caligula distanced himself even further from state affairs. Matters regarding finances, military strategy, and diplomacy were postponed or left unresolved. Senior officials began to fear the consequences of such delays, especially in distant provinces where local leaders depended on clear directives from Rome. As the emperor withdrew, the palace's power structure grew increasingly unstable. Advisors whispered among themselves, unsure how to interpret the emperor's behavior or what it implied for the future of Roman leadership. The influence of the Egyptian wing over Caligula's decisions became the subject of private concern, though no one dared to speak openly. For the first time, members of the Senate began quietly questioning whether the emperor's actions posed a threat to the very stability of the empire. They noted the sudden redirection of funds, the rearrangement of palace corridors, and the erratic schedule that left Rome without clear governance. What remained unknown to them, however, was the emotional and psychological transformation unfolding inside Caligula himself, a transformation deeply tied to the isolated presence of the Egyptian priestesses and the increasingly secretive rituals he imposed within that forbidden wing. The palace no longer felt like the center of Roman order. It was becoming a place governed by shifting shadows, guarded silence, and a ruler whose intentions were impossible to decipher.
As the months progressed, the interior of the imperial palace began to reflect the growing instability at the heart of Caligula's rule. Subtle architectural modifications appeared in areas that had remained unchanged since the early days of Augustus. Hallways once open to administrative staff were now sealed, and access to the eastern wing became increasingly restricted. Shipments of materials, marble slabs, imported fabrics, oil lamps, and objects of unmistakably Egyptian design were transported discreetly through service corridors. Workers assigned to late-night construction whispered that the emperor demanded constant adjustments, often revising plans without explanation. Every modification seemed intended to isolate the wing even further from the rest of the palace. The presence of the Praetorian Guard became heavier and more disciplined. Veteran soldiers patrolled the area with an intensity typically reserved for threats to imperial life. These changes did not go unnoticed. High-ranking administrators, responsible for tracking palace expenditures, noted alarming increases in spending linked to undisclosed interior projects. No official documentation explained these expenses, and questioning them was discouraged. Inside the court, conversations grew cautious. Advisors knew that Caligula was devoting significant time to the Eastern Wing, but no one understood why. Hours passed without word from the emperor, and critical decisions awaited his approval. Diplomatic petitions, military strategies, and trade matters were left unresolved, creating a ripple effect that spread through Rome's administrative system. Meanwhile, the priestesses confined within the wing endured conditions that deteriorated their physical and emotional well-being. These women, accustomed to sunlight, open courtyards, and the rhythm of sacred rituals, now lived within dimly lit chambers, surrounded by a silence as oppressive as the walls themselves. No communication was allowed, and the guards stationed at the entrance were instructed to prevent anyone from approaching. Some accounts suggest that the priestesses attempted to preserve fragments of their spiritual identity. Quiet recitations, improvised symbols, and gestures of purification were observed through cracks in the door or faint reflections of torchlight. These silent acts, expressions of resilience rather than rebellion, were misinterpreted by guards as potential threats, intensifying their vigilance. The atmosphere within the palace grew colder, heavier. Officials who once walked its corridors with confidence now did so with hesitation. Every mention of Egypt in Caligula's presence resulted in hostility, causing advisors to carefully avoid the subject. Reports from Alexandria were set aside, sometimes without being read, because no one wanted to provoke unpredictable reactions. Over time, the palace transformed from a center of Roman order into a place defined by secrecy and uncertainty. It became evident that the emperor's fixation on the Eastern Wing was now influencing the entire structure of governance. Decisions were delayed, responsibilities were abandoned, and the authority of the imperial office no longer carried the stability Rome depended on. The silence surrounding the Eastern Wing revealed more than any direct testimony ever could. It was the silence of a government losing cohesion, of an emperor withdrawing deeper into impulses that few could understand and none could control.
As the internal tension reached its highest point, Rome's political structure began to fracture. The emperor's withdrawal from public duties was no longer subtle or occasional. It had become absolute. Weeks passed without a single major address, audience, or administrative session led by Caligula. His absence created a vacuum that even the most skilled advisors could not fill. Governors from distant provinces sent urgent inquiries to the capital, seeking guidance on matters that required a firm imperial voice. Instead, they received vague replies composed by overworked scribes who struggled to maintain the illusion of order. Rome's allies and rivals observed the sudden quiet from the imperial court with growing concern. Inside the palace, the Praetorian Guard, tasked with protecting the emperor and preserving stability, found itself in a moral and political dilemma. Their loyalty was unwavering, but the emerging danger to Rome's administrative integrity could not be ignored. The Guard's leadership observed the emperor's recurring visits to the Eastern Wing, his sudden bursts of temper, and his detachment from reality. They understood that the empire could not function under such instability. The final turning point came when Caligula ordered another round of modifications to the Eastern Wing, this time designed to cut off access entirely from other sectors of the palace. These plans included sealed hallways, redirected patrol routes, and barriers that excluded even high-ranking officials from approaching the area. For Praetorian commanders, this was the clearest sign yet that Caligula intended to withdraw into a private domain governed solely by his impulses, disconnected from the administrative and political framework that upheld imperial authority. The thought of an emperor isolating himself within a hidden sanctuary, surrounded by foreign captives and rituals outside the Roman tradition, represented a profound threat. Rumors began circulating among the upper ranks of the Guard and the Senate. Whispered conversations took place behind closed doors, each one more tense than the last. It became clear that the emperor's behavior was eroding not only the palace's stability, but the integrity of the entire empire. When Caligula announced additional restrictions on who could enter the Eastern Wing, limitations that effectively stripped key officers of their authority, the Praetorian Guard recognized that they had reached a point of no return. Without decisive action, the empire risked collapsing into administrative paralysis. Late one night, a quiet consensus emerged among influential senators and senior Praetorianos. The situation had escalated beyond repair. Their duty was no longer to the emperor as an individual, but to the stability and survival of Rome itself. And so the threads that Caligula had been unraveling for months finally snapped. The palace, once the center of unity and command, became a labyrinth of guarded passages, hushed conversations, and shadows moving toward an inevitable end. The downfall of Caligula did not come suddenly. It was shaped by every act of secrecy, every unexplained absence, and every moment he withdrew deeper into the Eastern Wing, a place that had come to symbolize the widening gap between the emperor and the empire he was sworn to lead.
In the end, Caligula's decline was not marked by a single event, but by a series of choices that pushed him further from reason, responsibility, and the foundations of Roman authority. The isolation of the Egyptian priestesses, the secrecy surrounding the Eastern Wing, and the growing fracture between the emperor and his court created an environment that Rome could no longer sustain. When the balance finally broke, the empire acted out of necessity, not ambition. And Caligula's fall stands as a lasting reminder that even the most powerful ruler cannot govern through fear, secrecy, and isolation without eventually collapsing under the weight of his own decisions.